In this month's issue of the Gray Institute newsletter, we shared the thought process of balance and stability. Balance and stability perhaps is the most misunderstood principle and concept in function. I know when I learned about balance, I learned balance in what was called stillness. In order to evaluate balance, I had to look at how long somebody could stand on 2 feet or 1 foot as still as possible, and then when they started swaying, we all of a sudden said they were out of balance. However, as we learn more about balance, those who swayed perhaps were more in balance, because we realized that balance should be studied, balance should be appreciated, balance should be observed, and balance should be trained and rehabilitated in motion. In this month's issue, Andrea does an amazing job in her article called Balance in Motion. And she brings out the fact that in order to enhance someone's balance and stability, we have to do that with a strategy, a three-dimensional chain reaction strategy where the person is in motion. Now, we also find out that in real life that the motion that is created in two major ways. One way is where we have a ground that's not moving and our body is moving over what we would call a fixed ground. The other way we could take a look at that is where we have a ground or a surface or environment that is moving, but the body over it is trying to stay relatively quiet so it doesn't move and create a reaction where we lose our balance. I'm standing on what's called a Core-Tex. It's a relatively new piece of equipment that I believe is going to be extremely valuable in allowing us to do things that we weren't able to do in the clinic with our patients and our clients. In real life, many times we're on a solid surface or a solid ground, and we react with our body in motion. And so therefore balance would be studied in motion with a fixed surface, the body in motion. However, many times we find that if we can do some things that are controlled, very similar to how the Core-Tex is controlled, we can perhaps create even better balance. I have a lot of friends who are surfers, and as surfers they talk about this kind of this Zen quality of surfing, that they really have this ability to go out and really be a part of God's creation. And I really believe that, because I'm kind of jealous when they go out there. It just looks like they're having a lot more fun than I am on the beach with my high arched feet and inability to balance on a surfboard. But one of the things they also tell me is that, especially when they surf in the morning, that when they move around the ground during the day, they feel like they're more balanced to the ground. In other words, they're fixed to the ground better. And I believe that's because they've had the ability to literally surf with the surfboard free to move on the water in all three planes of motion, and their ability to actually create balance, what I would call from the core out. In other words, they don't have the ability to grab onto the ground and create balance there. They use the leverage of the board in order to create that, but if they push too hard on the board's going to actually fly out from underneath them and they will lose balance. And therefore, by having the opportunity to be on a surface such as the Core-Tex surface here, they're able to actually create balance in ways that they can't create it on level surface or on other tools that don't have the ability to move like this. Now, the unique feature of the Core-Tex that I think I enjoy the most is the ability of this thing to move very freely in the transverse plane. We can see that it moves quite nicely in the sagittal plane. We can see that it has a nice side-to-side action to it. But we also see that at the same time it has the same degrees of freedom in the transverse plane. In other words, the same flux of freedom. In other words, it actually has more degrees of freedom in the transverse plane because there's no bumper in the transverse plane. There's bumpers here in the sagittal plane. I can go so far and I bump and save myself, and I can bump in the frontal plane, but there's really no bumper in the transverse plane. And so in order to decelerate that, my body has to say, okay, you're not going to hit something that's going to give you stability from the ground up, So you better come up with a strategy somewhere in your core to decelerate that. Now again, very similar to training on a surfboard or a skateboard or something that's going to kind of move underneath me. When I then get on the ground, I feel more balanced, so to speak. I feel more solid to the ground. I feel a little more part of the earth. But we also find that this is a great tool that we can utilize to simulate what happens when we're in the air. So for example, if I'm a volleyball spiker and I use the ground to create my reaction and explode in the air, I now have to actually load myself in all three planes of motion and find my balance, decelerate my balance in the air, find the ability to decelerate that with my core muscles without my feet being fixed to the earth, and then exploding through in order to hit the ball. This is a wonderful, wonderful tool in order to simulate a lot of the things that our body does when it's airborne. Now when you think about it, we're airborne a lot. When we jog, we're airborne. When we actually just kind of move off the ground and are actually reaching for something, we're airborne. Certainly when we jump to get something or to hit something, we're airborne. And so this is a kind of a really nice piece of equipment that creates an environment that simulates some really cool biomechanical reactions that we can't do on other surfaces. Now, again, with any tool, you can see that we not only can use this as creating a reaction with gravity with our feet to create the reactions that we need in order to simulate some things, but we obviously could have some other tools. We could be playing catch with a medicine ball. I could have a stretch cord. Obviously, I could be going through my shoulder overhead matrix with some weights. But you also can do this not only with your feet, but with your hands. This is another thing I like about this for some really, really good core training, is to simply use the Core-Tex environment with my hands, because again, I have this ability to move in all three planes of motion, and especially this rotary motion, this nice flow that the Core-Tex affords me is really powerful in creating this reaction. Now, one of the nice things about this tool, again, is it's a kind of little bit of a predictable reaction that, like I said, has kind of an end range to it, but there's a certain kind of thing where if you don't let it use the end range, it's truly reactive. Many times I think one of the weaknesses that I have in the programs that I design for my patients or for my clients is I don't make it reactive enough. In other words, it's too proactive. They almost kind of know what's going to happen, and therefore their mind can kind of predetermine the proprioceptive sense that they're going to feel in order to create the reaction that they want. This thing, there's not the prediction there. In other words, you've got to sense it, you got to feel it, you got to smell it, you got to kind of sway with it in all three planes of motion, and immediately you ultimately feel like, I have to react to this thing. I can't be kind of predetermining where this thing is going to go. Again, I think the key to any program or any environment is after you get done training or rehabbing on that environment, if you can get off the environment and then go do that which you want to do better, then it's probably a good environment. In other words, if I get on this and I use it as a way to facilitate the transformational zones of my golf swing, knowing all along that I rarely, on the golf course, stand on something that's moving underneath me, but if I can come up with a strategy where I can properly utilize that, and now when I actually use my golf swing, I think, boy, that's a little bit easier. The ground's not moving. I'm able to actually create the acceleration from the deceleration of my core muscles to hit the ball better. Then I'm going to probably come back to this thing, because after I get off the golf course, I'm going to say, you know what? That thing, that strategy relative to balance and stability really made a difference. So as we understand balance and motion, as Andrea shared with us in her wonderful article, we know there's two extreme strategies: the body moving on a fixed surface or the body moving on a surface that moves. And again, as with all function, function truly is what we call a paradox. It's a tension, it's a dance between both of those things. It's not one or the other. It's how well can we integrate both of those systems, both of those thought processes, both of those truths, in creating an environment where our patients and clients simply will get better and enjoy life a lot more. I think you're really going to enjoy the Core-Tex.